Welcome to the Wolverine TV. Clayton Sayfie with EJ Holland here from the Wolverine.com. Use the promo code BLUE60 for 2 months of our premium content for free. EJ, we'll start this Wolverine recruiting show with the fact that George Rooks, a Rivals 250 defensive lineman, is now a Michigan commit. Let's start with his recruitment because this is a crazy one. Swings towards Michigan back in the summer, to Penn State. There was a Boston College swing. I mean, you've talked about this on record, how it's one of the crazier recruitments in terms of picks going in for this school, that school, and now back to Michigan. But just overall, I guess, what swung the tide here for Michigan to end up landing George Rooks?
I think Brooks was like truly undecided. We see so many kids playing games on social media and releasing top schools left and right. And, with Rooks, yes, he always said he was going to commit and then never committed. But he said that like to reporters. It's not like he was putting out on social media like committing August, committing September, committing October. He never released a top schools list. I mean, he hardly ever tweets at all. I really, truly think that George Rooks is just a nice kid who just had no clue what he wanted to do. But he is a smart kid, and I think ultimately he just sided with the school that he felt most comfortable with. Uh, if you remember, the first pick to ever go in across any network was mine to Michigan back in, I want to say it was like late May or early June, whenever he was first initially about to commit. Um, and like I said, he was about to commit to Michigan. We have had a George Brooks commitment story on our publishing system since that time. Like it's literally just been sitting there in case he committed one day to Michigan. But yeah, so I think with him, it was just more comfort. Michigan's the school he's visited the most out of any of the finalists that were in his top group, Boston College and Penn State being the other two. And then his sister Taylor played basketball at Michigan on the women's basketball team as a grad transfer. So he, like I said, he's been on campus more than any other school, a lot with his sister being a basketball player. And with the other two schools he visited, but not as much. Michigan's been recruiting him the longest as well. Jim Harbaugh actually personally offered him when he was younger. Sean New has been recruiting him for a couple of years. Sharon Moore's been involved for a little while. So I think it was just familiarity. I also feel like Michigan is just the school he wanted to go to begin with. That's why the first pick was Michigan. I feel like the uncertainty around the coaching staff caused some of that pinballing with the picks. But even then, I know Penn State was really optimistic with George Rooks heading into the weekend because he was considering making a decision this past weekend. And actually, on the Rivals national publishing system, there's a graphic of George Rooks committing to Penn State.
I saw
So
that.
that should tell you a little bit about all the pinballing that there was. I mean, he was also close to making a decision during the early signing period, and Boston College was gearing up to receive a commitment. So at the end of the day, I think it was just Michigan getting things settled in, extending Harbaugh, hiring a new defensive staff, keeping Nua and Sharon Moore. And like I said, just that comfort, that familiarity. Ultimately, once the dust cleared and Michigan had everything locked in, I think Rook said, you know what, everything looks stable at Michigan now, and this is the school I've always liked and I'm most comfortable with. So let's go ahead and side with Michigan. So I don't think it was any one thing that really turned the tide. I think it was just more everything's now stable. This is actually where I'm most comfortable at. And signing day is almost a few days away. So I need to go ahead and actually make a decision.
You touched on this in your analysis of what getting George Rooks really means for Michigan. We'll talk about him as a player on the field in just a second, but you touched on the coaches that were recruiting him. His position coach, defensive line coach Sean Nua, obviously very involved. But at a point in the process, they got Sharon Moore involved, the ace recruiter, now the co-offensive coordinator and offensive line coach, was previously coaching tight ends. They got him involved. Also, obviously, some new defensive coaches, like Mike McDonald, I'm sure, has probably been in on a conversation with him. At least that would be my guess. I guess for Sean Nua, a guy who hasn't had a lot of big wins in his tenure at Michigan on the recruiting trail, how big of the, I know he wasn't alone on this. He wasn't the only guy recruiting rooks, but I guess how big of a win is this for Sean Nua, a guy who's taken a lot of heat, and I think it's been warranted to an extent because, Michigan's lacking on the defensive line. All eyes are on the defensive line, so he's kind of put in a spot where it's like you have to deliver, otherwise people are going to be upset.
Yeah, with Sean Nua, I think he is what he is. Look, Sean Nua is a guy that connects really well with kids. When I talked to George Rooks and his father, we had a special story with his father yesterday talking about the commitment. They both said, he connected so well with George. He's, a big guy, but he's a friendly guy, a jolly guy at heart. And, a lot of kids say that about Sean Nua. They think he's a funny guy, a guy that, they can talk to about anything. So he's a good recruiter in that sense, in that he does connect well with kids. I think I kind of likened him on the message board to, like, that guy in high school. You're a nice guy, but you don't always get the girl. Girls like the nice guy, but they don't always end up dating the nice guy. And I think that's a decent comparison for Sean Nua, as weird as that sounds, just because I feel like he has trouble closing. I think he's such a nice guy that maybe he's not assertive enough. He doesn't have that, X factor to close that elite recruiters do. So I think Sean Nua is good at relationship building. Once he really gets into a groove with a kid, another criticism of Nua has been just on and off contact with guys, but I think that's more with underclassmen. I think once he really starts to develop relationships, he does keep in constant contact. So that's another area he can improve on. But, in terms of, getting into later in the cycle with certain kids, he just needs help closing. And that's fine. Look, not every coach on your coaching staff, regardless of what school you're at, is going to be a top end recruiter. You're just not going to have a staff full of top end recruiters. So I think Sean Nua is probably the weakest, if not one of the weaker links, but he still succeeds in a pivotal area, which is obviously relationship building. He just needs help closing. And the good thing about that is that Michigan hired a staff full of young, hungry recruiters that can help close. Sharon Moore can help close, with Rooks, and did do that. You have Ron Bellamy, who can help close with Rayshon Benny here late. You have Maurice Linguist, who can help close with Ike Iwana late. I'm not saying that Michigan's going to get all of those guys, but I think that Nua is getting the appropriate help to cover up some of the weaknesses he does have on the recruiting trail. So I'm not, saying Nua sucks, but I'm also not saying Nua is now this amazing recruiter. It's just Michigan has the right pieces in place to help each other out. The same, could be said about a guy like, George Hilo. We don't know a lot about him. From what I've heard, he's a very good recruiter, but he has Maurice Linguist to help him out on the back end as well with some of the other defensive back targets. Linguist being a more proven guy who's landed a bunch of national top 100 defensive backs. So I think with Nua, it's just about getting him some help, and he has the help here. He had it with Rooks, and he has it with some of the remaining targets. With Nua moving forward, I'd like to see him be more proactive in starting the relationships across the board with not only kids, but coaches and trainers, and then just improving his ability to close.
And hey, all that really matters is if they land the guys that they want to land. It'd be another big statement if they got Rayshon Benny, like you talked about. It's not him on his own getting him, but if this new Michigan staff can work together like that, and you got Ron Bellamy helping out, and heard he has a good relationship with Sean Nua, and they start landing these guys, then it's all going to fall into place, and no one's going to care, whether or not Sean Nua is an elite closer, because he has help and he can help some other guys out, and it just will go in all directions positively for Michigan. The last thing, in terms of I've watched some of this kid's film, and very athletic, and you've written about him a lot, and we've talked about him on this show. A very athletic defensive lineman who could probably play the 3 technique or on the outside. It's interesting because Michigan's switching defenses, and it looks like it'll be a 3-down front in a 3-4 defense. And I'm sure there'll be multiple, but I guess where do you think he fits in at Michigan without knowing, all the specifics of exactly what Michigan's going to run on that side of the ball? I guess where do you think he fits in? What does he excel at the most?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends once we get a look at the intricacies of what the defense is going to be. I mean, if it's a standard 3-4, he'll likely be, one of the end spots as opposed to just being a head up nose. But the good thing about Rooks is that he does provide flexibility along the defensive line. He's actually played multiple spots along the defensive line. He has experience playing the 5. He has experience playing the 3. In certain situations, he even lined up as a wide 9. So he's a guy that can play pretty much anywhere because he does have that length and athletic ability that's kind of rare in an interior guy. He's listed at 260, but when I went out to see him in September, I want to say he was up to about 272. So I think his profile is just a little out of date. He has added some really good weight, and I think he's going to add 20, 25 more pounds to his frame. And I think he has the frame to do that. So I think he can maintain that athleticism. Obviously, his length's not going to change. So I think he is good at providing a pass rush from a 5 tech, or he can also provide a pass rush from the interior. And with him, I think he has all the potential in the world. Like I said, the athletic ability, the length is really outstanding. His technique is tremendous. This is a guy that works with former NFL defensive tackle Javon Parker during the offseason, and his father, George Rooks Sr., was drafted by the New York Giants. So the technique, the bloodlines, that's there. I mean, if you look at the way he uses his hands and just his fundamentals overall, it's really, really advanced for his age. So all that, there's a lot to like with him. I think the biggest thing is he has such a quiet demeanor, and what he is as a recruit is reflected on the field as well. I think he needs to be more aggressive. I think he needs to play with a mean attitude. I think he needs to play angry. And there are times on film, and a lot of times you have to remember coaches have access to full game film. Sometimes we have access to full game films. So what you see on huddle isn't always necessarily, true because those are highlight tapes. But I think with him on his highlights, he does show times where he is aggressive, but he needs to do it more consistently. When I went out to his training session, for example, even his trainer, I asked him, what's the biggest thing George needs to work on? And he said his physicality, just being aggressive. He has a little brother, and his little brother is a more undersized interior defensive lineman. And he says, look at his little brother. He plays with a pit bull mentality. I need George to play with that pit bull mentality. And if George can be aggressive and physical on a consistent basis, this guy literally has top 100 recruit potential. Just because of how technical he is, how smart he is, how athletic he is, how long he is. It's just about developing that physicality, especially in a conference like the Big Ten, which is extremely physical.
Yeah, regardless, an absolutely big win for Michigan on the defensive line where they needed guys. All right, here's the deal, everybody. We had recorded the rest of our recruiting show this week, and then George Rooks commits. So we added this in. So if you're watching on YouTube, we're going to be wearing different clothes, different attire the rest of the show. But we got some great stuff, including talking about Ron Bellamy, just what kind of an impact he's going to have on the recruiting trail, and an update on where Michigan stands with Rayshon Benny, the 4-star Michigan State defensive tackle recruit who we alluded to earlier. So check the rest of the video out. And thanks for watching. Rayshon Benny, let's just get into him then. The Michigan State commit out of Oak Park, Rivals 100 D tackle. It's coming down to the end here, and we know for a fact that he's open to listening to other schools, Michigan, and now you have reported Texas kind of getting in the mix. I guess what is the latest exactly with him and your thoughts on Michigan's chances?
I think if you're a Michigan fan, there is reason to be optimistic, but not confident. So for me, I would describe it as cautiously optimistic. Optimistic. Do I think Benny can flip? Definitely. Do I think Benny will flip? Maybe. The new staff has been working hard on him, but again, familiarity. He already knows Sean Newell extremely well. He already knows Sharon Moore extremely well, and I know Sharon Moore especially has been working extremely hard on Benny, since the early signing period. Even yesterday, Moore was talking to Benny. So I think Moore's helping out a lot, but I think the X factor in this recruitment, who we'll talk about a little later in the show as well, is new assistant Ron Bellamy. Obviously, he is a respected high school coach in the state of Michigan, now on the Michigan staff as a wide receivers coach. He coached against Oak Park head coach Greg Carter the last couple of years, and for many years before that. There's familiarity there. Again, he has the respect of the high school coaches. I don't think there was a certain trust level there between the Michigan high school coaches, specifically in the Detroit metro area and the University of Michigan. I think Ron Bellamy provides that kind of liaison for the Detroit high school coaches, Detroit metro high school coaches. And I think that will help in the Benny recruitment here down the stretch. When Benny originally was trending to Michigan before he ultimately committed to Michigan State, one of the biggest hurdles for Michigan was stability. There's now stability. There's now familiarity with Bellamy. He's friends with guys in the class like Donovan Edwards and Andro Anthony, who are also recruiting him hard. So this one makes sense. I know Michigan State obviously beat Michigan on the field this year. I know Mel Tucker historically has been a good recruiter, as much as Michigan fans do not like him. I feel like he has historically been a good recruiter. He did do a really good job of getting Benny to initially commit. But I think the door is open, and I think the door is obviously open. I mean, if he were completely solid with Michigan State and confident in his decision, he would have signed during the early period. Obviously, he did not. That's left the door open for Michigan. Other schools have gotten involved as well. Benny's a very low-key kid. Clay, you've met him before as well. He's not going to post new offers or anything, but Texas has quietly been making a run behind the scenes. I've heard from people down in Austin that there's optimism there that they can flip him. So obviously, again, the door is wide open, but I think Michigan would be a more comfortable situation if he were to back away from that Michigan State commitment and choose to go elsewhere on signing day.
Yeah, and when I had talked to him a couple times in the fall, like you mentioned, he was even saying when I make a decision, I still kind of want to see some schools. Now that was before they actually extended the dead period, but he was always kind of open to maybe seeing more schools and not necessarily signing early. So, he's certainly open to that, it looks like, as it goes down to the end here, but still committed to Michigan State. And by the way, if you think Michigan fans don't like Mel Tucker, you should have really known the full story about how they didn't like Mark D'Antonio, because he was really the hated villain around here. But I digress. And then the last guy, Ike Iwuna, 3-star defensive tackle out of Texas. Your thoughts on Michigan's chances there? Kind of guy that came up late, it seems. The new offer that you alluded to there.
Yeah, Ike Iwuna is a very interesting prospect, both from an on-the-field and off-the-field standpoint. He is kind of the opposite of recruits these days. He's almost non-existent on social media. I actually talked to his, in Texas, at the high school level, there are recruiting coordinators. So, just like at the college level, where there's assistant coaches that have the recruiting coordinator title, it's the same for Texas high schools. So it's obviously a big operation. But I talked to his recruiting coordinator, and he told me, I had to make Ike post his Michigan offer just so people would be aware that he had a Michigan offer, because he didn't want to do it. So he's basically non-existent on social media. his coach even told me that sometimes Ike wouldn't really respond to coaches, not because he didn't, respect them reaching out, but because he was kind of scared about what he should say with his reply. So he's very green to the process. He doesn't like recruiting at all. He will not talk or do interviews. So he's just kind of off the grid. I mean, he's a guy that's going to make a decision on signing day and it's just going to, be a surprise to everyone because nobody's really going to know where he's going. Luckily, I do have some connections down in Texas from my time in Dallas. I actually lived like 10 minutes away from his high school when before I moved to Chicago. So again, I've been talking to his recruiting coordinator, and there is familiarity there. One, Maurice Linguist obviously has a lot of Texas ties, will be heavily involved with Ike Iwuna. And then two, his recruiting coordinator, Ant Sinclair, actually made a visit to Michigan himself with five-star running back Kamar Wheaton last year. So he's met the Michigan staff in person. He's seen the Michigan facilities and campus in person. He can tell Ike about it. And like he told me, I can connect with Linguists just because they're both Dallas guys. He can answer questions about Michigan, or about the recruiting process that other guys can't necessarily do because they're not from the same area. So I think all of that really helps with Michigan. So the weird part is he's actually committed to Colorado, but I still think he's very open to listening to what Michigan has to offer. And I think the familiarity with his recruiting coordinator, who's a big mentor and influence in his life, is going to really help Michigan here. I mean, there is a world where they can get all three of these guys here down the stretch. Or if you remember, Michigan was planning to take around 25 this cycle. They're only at 20. So, I mean, obviously they want to add some guys in the portal, and I'm not necessarily sure if they would take all three guys, but it is realistic. I'm not saying it's going to happen or that I'm hopeful that it would happen, but I think it's definitely a possible scenario.
Let's talk about some of the guys that are signed with Michigan who received rankings bumps. A couple guys moved down in the rankings in the latest release of the Rivals 250, but Donovan Edwards receives a significant nudge up from number 74 nationally to number 58, jumping 16 spots. And this is a kid who had, I think, 16 total touchdowns in his last 4 games, all playoff games, took over in some of those games and won his team a state title, all while playing as an early enrollee the last couple weeks, technically enrolled at Michigan, taking classes online. And then the next most significant bump is Junior Colson, moving up from 94 to 82. And you had Greg Crippen move up 1 spot, the offensive lineman out of IMG Academy. Raheem Anderson stayed at 166. Christian Dixon stayed put at 201. Then you had J.J. McCarthy. He moved down 3 spots to number 44 in the country. Xavier Worthy, the receiver, moves down to number 66. Louis Hansen falls 1 spot down to 83. And Giovanni El Hadi moves down 2 spots to 92. And Jadon Hood moved down 2 spots to number 225. So it's also funny because every time new rankings come out, every Michigan fan says that all of our commits dropped. Well, Donovan Edwards, people were watching those, and he obviously got a bump for that. Junior Colson, who's a fantastic player, and I know you think is the best recruit in this Michigan signing class, he gets his bump up 12 spots. But just your overall thoughts, I guess, on some of the movement there.
Yeah, starting with the guys that moved up, Donovan was the most significant. Like you said, 16 spots. Also got a bump from a 5.9 to a 6. For people unfamiliar with rankings, that means he moved up from a mid 4-star to a high 4-star. Still, I think Donovan could have climbed even higher. I mean, his senior year was spectacular. He obviously led West Bloomfield to its first state title in school history. On top of that, he had more than 250 yards and 3 touchdowns in the game. So overall, I mean, his entire playoff run and his season in general were spectacular as well. I mean, he racked up some really big numbers. As Ron Bellamy said, if they wanted to, I mean, he could have been a 3,000-yard rusher, but he only played, in one half of those games or quarter here and there because West Bloomfield was blowing people out. But more so than stats, obviously, sometimes stats don't really matter in recruiting. The thing I loved about Donovan is that he took the next step. Last year, I saw Donovan and I was like, this is a really good player, definitely a 4-star guy. He's really good. This year, I was like, okay, Donovan took the step from really good to elite. He improved his speed, his explosion, his strength. Everything took another step. And I was really happy to see that and really proud of Donovan personally, just because he's one of my favorite kids in the class and probably of all time. But I think Donovan is a top 50 player. I don't think he got enough of a bump. I think Donovan should have been ranked even higher, considering what he did as a senior and how he looked as a senior. I've seen Kamar Wheaton play. I've seen LJ Johnson live. I think Donovan Edwards is the top running back in the country. I really do. It's a weak year for running backs, but I think Donovan is the best of this group. I think a guy like Kamar Wheaton has more upside, but I do think Donovan's the better prospect right now and has the higher floor. And I just like his game overall a lot more. And then Junior Colson, same thing. I think he got a bump, but I think it should have been a bigger bump. I mean, only moving from 94 to 82, not much of a difference there. He still stayed a mid 4-star guy. I mean, to me, Junior's a top 50 player as well. I think he showed that this season in 8 games. He had 101 tackles and 7 sacks despite playing with a hurt shoulder. He was really, really good at the pylon All-American experience. Like I mentioned before, he's from Haiti, so he didn't have, the same exposure to football that a lot of these other recruits had. He's only been playing a linebacker spot for 3 years. To be that big at 6'2", 225, and to run in the 4.4s, I mean, you're a pretty special athlete. And again, considering he's only been playing the linebacker spot for 3 years, I think his potential is through the roof. So unfortunately, Rivals had some movement with their national analysts, and I don't think any national guy saw Junior live this year, which is a little disappointing, and I think speaks to his ranking in the sense that he didn't get a bigger bump. But to me, I feel like Junior definitely should have. Looking at the guys that didn't get bumps, everybody wants to know my opinion on JJ McCarthy. Like, I think JJ is obviously a really special player. His intangibles are tremendous. His arm talent is elite. I would have had JJ ranked right as a borderline 5-star, kind of in that. If I were to place him in a range, it would be in between 28 and 35, kind of in that area. I think that's right at a 5-star, a very, very high 4-star. I feel like JJ is going to surprise a lot of people that misranked him. He definitely deserved to be higher as well. So, it is what it is. I mean, that's not that far down. Considering, in the low or in the high 40s to where I would have him ranked at. But I know JJ is going to take that personally and try to prove people wrong. And that's just the kind of kid JJ is. I mean, everybody else, pretty much stayed the same. Unfortunately for Louis Hansen, he didn't have a season. I think El Hadi's ranked about right. I think Worthy's ranked about right. I was surprised Crippen got a little bit of a bump. But that's obviously great for Michigan perception. Everybody else, again, looked like was ranked about right. I don't think I would make a super strong case for anybody else that got disrespected or anything. I feel like it was all pretty much, the same as the last update. Very slight drops. There was nobody that received any type of drastic drops. I think the biggest drop was only 2 spots.
Yeah, I think there's, you look at the bumps that like Donovan and Junior got, much more significant than anyone moving down. Nobody, got a evaluation where it was like, oh shoot, we had him way too high. No, they were about properly ranked, but then, some guys surged up, and you saw that with Junior Colson not only having a big senior year, but just being a really good prospect in general. And then Donovan Edwards having that huge senior year, that monster senior year that he needed to climb up and get that nudge. The last thing with Ron Bellamy being hired as Michigan their wide receivers coach, we kind of discussed it a little bit earlier when you mentioned Rayshon Benny and just how much Ron Bellamy is going to be able to improve the Michigan in-state recruiting that's been kind of a talking point, throughout the state and the Detroit media and everything else. But this is a guy that, I know you know better than I do, but I've gotten to talk to him on multiple occasions, and just the amount that he cares about the kids, how good of a coach he is, how much he cares about the University of Michigan. Talking to him on signing day about just how happy he was that Donovan did choose Michigan, a place he went. He did not push Donovan to Michigan, but he said he was kind of happy in the end that ended up being his alma mater. So just your thoughts overall on what Ron Bellamy is going to do on the recruiting trail. We're going to miss him, as a guy in the high school ranks, I think, around the state of Michigan. Just got his first state title over the weekend, but overall, a big step for him, and it just seems like one step on what's going to be a pretty good climb for a guy like this, kind of a rising star type guy in the profession.
Yeah, like you said, it's kind of bittersweet just because, I'm going to miss covering Coach Bell from, recruiting standpoint. Getting to know him this year was pretty awesome. I mean, he's such a great guy, one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. And like you said, he just cares so much about his kids. I mean, Donovan absolutely loved him. Obviously, West Bloomfield, the players on the West Bloomfield team would go to war for him. I mean, he's such a motivational guy, and he's such a genuine guy. On top of that, everybody likes Coach Bell. All the coaches around the state, specifically in the Detroit metro, have the utmost respect for Coach Bell. And I think that's going to help with in-state recruiting perception. I think that's going to bridge some of the gaps that have been, created, to whoever's fault that is, who cares. I think Bellamy is going to kind of fill those potholes and smooth the road a little bit for Michigan. I think that his ties in the area are definitely going to help lure more top talent. Michigan only landed 2 of the top 6 recruits in the state of Michigan this cycle. I think that's going to change. I think they're going to keep who they want home for the most part with Coach Bell on staff. And I just think the relationships with the high school coaches are going to be a lot better. And then I wouldn't underestimate, Coach Bell as an actual on the field coach. I mean, he obviously played at Michigan. Like you said, he loves the university. He definitely knows what he's doing. He's obviously led West Bloomfield to a state title. So I really like what Coach Bell brings to the table. I think it's an A+ hire. And overall, I think it's going to be one that benefits Michigan in multiple ways, but not enough great things to say about Coach Bell. I mean, he is just an awesome guy, an awesome coach, and it's just going to be a great asset to the university.
Yeah, and we've talked about this with Mike Hart about how he's going to help in-state recruiting because he played at Michigan and he's really recruited Detroit really well at all of his stops. When you go back to Western Michigan, Eastern, even at Syracuse, pulled some kids out of there, and then Indiana, of course, being in the Midwest. But it's going to be the same thing with Ron Bellamy. We were talking to guys last week. We mentioned it on the video last week, but when we were on Sound Body, talking to coaches and talking to trainers, we talked to Curtis Blackwell, and the things that they said about Mike Hart are basically the same things that they would say about Ron Bellamy, a guy who knows the area. Ron Bellamy's a native of Louisiana, but he's been in Detroit really ever since he came to Michigan and played there. And moving there and married. His wife is from the area. So he's a Detroit guy too. He's got the Louisiana roots, but just someone that knows the area, has the relationships, has the connections, cares about the kids from there. And I think it's just going to be a massive plus for Michigan. And I think it's kind of a philosophy change by Jim Harbaugh saying that, and maybe not even philosophy change, but just an overall evaluation of the program after this past season. What went wrong on the field obviously was the bulk of it, but off the field, what happened in recruiting? How come we're not keeping more kids home, from the Detroit area and in-state in general? And he said, I'm going to go get guys that are going to do that for me. And I think Ron Bellamy is, and Mike Hart as well, and some of these other guys are going to be able to do that at a super, super high level. He couldn't have made a better choice, and happy for him too. When you look at what he was able to do at West Bloomfield, and then parlay that into now a career as a on-field position coach at the University of Michigan, big time move for him. But specifically on Rayshon Benny, though, how much contact does a guy like Ron Bellamy have, do you think, right away with a kid like that to try to start pulling kids immediately?
No, I mean, he's going to get on the phone with him right away. He's going to be in contact with Oak Park head coach Greg Carter, and they're just kind of going to let Coach Bell loose with all these in-state guys. I mean, he's going to be involved in every in-state recruitment. I can guarantee you that. So I do think he is an X factor for Rayshon Benny here down the stretch as Benny continues to mull over his decision. I think Bellamy gives Michigan an advantage that Michigan State doesn't necessarily have.
No doubt. That is our show for this week, the Wolverine Recruiting Show. Remember, Blue 60 is the promo code at thewolverine.com to get 2 months of our premium content for free. We'll talk to you next week.